Very good evening to everybody. Hi, Pavitra. Um, we are just in Bombay, very fortunate that the cyclone Nisarga just missed us, but it has been very devastating, I believe, for Mahabaleshwar, Raigad, Alibag, and on its way to Nasik. So let's just count our blessings, guys. And we are all okay, thanks to everybody's prayers and well wishes. Rajinder ji, ki haal hai tode? So today we are going to be talking with Anindo Bose. For those who don't know him, he's a musician and he has played in many bands and now with Advaita, and he has a duo with Pavitra called Shadow and Light. And he also runs a studio. He's a sound engineer as well. So we just thought we should have a conversation with somebody who straddles both musician side as well as the engineering side, and so that's why we have Anindo Bose with us. All safe, guys. So far so good in Bombay, so let's see how that goes. So let's try and get Anindo on board. Hey Anindo.
Hello sir, क्या हाल है?
So far so good. Everything's okay, so everything's under control. So that's why we are having this DAC today instead of postponing it. I was a little worried about how things would pan out, but thankfully everything is good. So welcome Anindo to this DAC conversation.
Thank you. I'm glad Mumbai has been spared mostly. I mean, city has weakened, but it is concerning to know it's hit some of the other areas.
Yeah, we just got reports from some people in Alibag. It's been pretty bad. Electricity is down, water is down, so I think it'll take some time before they get it back up. So meanwhile, let's have a conversation with you, Anindo.
Yes.
And so I just told everybody a little bit about Advaita, your band.
Mm-hmm.
But before we delve into Advaita, I just would like you to tell all our listeners and viewers, Anindo Bose pre-Advaita. You played in lots of bands, you are a musician, you are trying to make ends meet in Delhi. Chittaranjan Park, is that right? In Delhi?
Yes.
Or
Still,
Chit Park?
yeah. Chit Park is much out.
Yeah, so just take us briefly through Anindo Bose pre-Advaita, till the time you hit and formed a band Advaita and you released album. So what were you doing and what was your transitioning through various phases in your life regarding music and audio?
I mean, first of all, again, like, thank you so much for having me as part of these, this series here. I mean, it's amazing, like, to be talking to you. I mean, it should be the other way around. I should be, questions you've had some elaborate, area.
I think everybody is going to gang up and ask me a whole bunch of a set of questions towards the end of it. Everybody keeps saying that, so I think I'm a little worried now. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I mean, for me, music, I think, started out pretty early. I'm a completely self-taught keyboard player and self-taught engineer. I think by class 11, 12, I was kind of pretty confidently playing the keyboards. Very quiet though in school. No, very few people knew that I played the keys. I guess I didn't find like-minded people back then play the same kind of style of music or like what I was doing. But I didn't really think of taking it professionally. It was just very strong. Both my parents have always been listening to music right from my childhood days. I got into classic rock because of dad and his tastes. All the 70s rock bands, and of course all the the Hindi film music of that time. Grown up on all of that. And I think by the time I was in class 12, I had my very first performance. This was under a company called Teamwork, and now known as Teamwork Arts, Sanjay Roy. And a lot, in fact, have performed through his festivals the very first time. So I suppose this was when I was in 11th or 12th or something. We did a performance, and incidentally, my dad was also in the same band, and he was doing vocals. For me, it was a nice initiation, performance. And it was a very nice, comfortable, informal setup. But we did a lot of classic rock, and a lot of people took notice to, generally the songs. And one person came up to me after the show and said, we're looking for a keyboard player. Would you like to play? And I said, of course, I to perform, but I have my 12th boards coming up. If you can give me 3-4 months. So they said, yeah, of course. So I think first year ho gaya, and then immediately I went and not kind of auditioned, but I just jammed with them a little bit, and we kind of immediately hit it off. And this
Okay.
band, Friday the 13th, believe it or not, and very prog rock kind of influenced band.
What
But
year was this?
this was I think 2001, so long back. So 2001 to 2003, I would say, is when I stuck around with that outfit. But I guess around that time, originals was still not so much of the focus with
Yeah.
most. It was very driven around competitions and like Great Indian Rock and all the other
And doing
competitions
cover versions, yes.
versions. But we did, because of that band, we did write a few originals. That was the first time I got into a little bit of writing originals and using my influences, and of course, collectively as the band. But we did write a few originals, and we won GIR 2003. So that was a very, very big. And for the originals, and I think Jonas Helborg and all those guys were judging.
Somebody's mentioning, Amitabh Bose mentioning we called ourselves Fuzzy Logic. What was that?
Yes, that Fuzzy Logic was the name of the band, and
Okay.
so yeah, I mean, through that outfit, a lot of people took notice to us individually, and of course, as a keyboard player, a lot of people heard me. It
Right.
was a good form. But I think after that, contest, we kind of realized that our, influences and our own individual songwriting was kind of drifting, and we were going to our own spaces. And around then, I joined a group called Artists Unlimited, which was a very large ensemble based in Delhi.
Yes.
I only remember that. And Annette Phillip of the Berkeley Indian Ensemble now, she's the director there. She formed that setup, and she had invited me to play, the keyboards for a few songs in that setup. But it just so happened that things clicked, and I ended up, being one of the, core members in the group, and we wrote a whole album, and that was, I think, through them was my first experience of recording in a studio in Bombay. Back then, that was the Empire Studios, and met Shantanu sir and Abhishek Khandelwal, of course. So meeting everybody at a very young age, and it was lovely. And of course, that room is so huge. It's
Yeah.
when you walk into it, it's like a football field going there.
Right.
And all of us, like, early 20s in a large choir ensemble. So we had a lot of fun. So these two
Great.
groups were the initial phases where I started taking to songwriting. And a lot of my own musical tastes kept changing. From prog rock, it became more about Broadway, gospel music, R&B, soul. And then through that period of Artists Unlimited is when I met some other, members in that group, Jayan and Ujjwal, and a couple of others. And it just so happened that when Friday the 13th kind of became defunct, there was another setup that was trying to form itself, which would concentrate only on originals. And it had no name, but it was a kind of fusion outfit, basically because there were more people who were also doing music from the the Indian. It was not a forced effort at all, and that's where the first time I kind of worked with musicians from the Hindustani background, and again, it felt like a very, very strong pull towards that form and that style of music. And over 3-4 months, we started feeling the jam vibe, and it started happening. And then we looked for a name, and our then guitar player Aditya Balani suggested the name Advaita, and that's how the band Advaita started
The
out.
band
So,
Advaita.
yeah.
Okay. So all this while your parents didn't want you to get a job in Tata or TCS or anything like that?
Well, thankfully, I mean, my parents have always been very supportive. They're still very supportive, and I remember they had asked me if I wanted to do any like a master's or post graduation course in music or business. But I was, I think, very, very drawn towards performing live in general. And when
Okay.
I had a couple of experiences of recording in a studio, the behind the scene thing gave me more of a pull, I would say, that even being on stage. So I really wanted to explore that direction, and I told them that I need some time to explore this, and then let's just see how it goes. And for a very brief period, I had considered doing sound engineering course from SAE, either in Chennai or I think then probably Australia. Byron Bay
Yeah,
was.
Byron Bay, yeah. But this interest in audio was like just around the time of forming Advaita, or this was post Advaita, the engineering part of interest?
It was kind of in tandem, because what was happening is that we would do shows and we were not getting good sound check, something always going wrong, and I kind of took to it as a challenge and said, look, we need to communicate better with the person there. So a lot of things and I would say a lot of common sense also in terms of how to approach the problem and then look at the other person's point of view kind of helped me drive myself towards that. And then I started listening to music from the console with a little bit more intent of actually understanding what the engineer is doing, rather than just say, okay, this is somebody who's just controlling the sound on stage and getting the band across. So more about the technical bit of it. And I just found it so intriguing as I discovered.
So I empathize with that totally, because I took the same route, playing in a band and trying to get the band to sound better, and consequently bugging the hell out of my two sound engineers, Amit and Puneet Chandra in Delhi, and staying at their house in the night so they could teach me something about sound and preamps and what these knobs, colorful knobs did. So yeah, I empathize with that totally. So again, you are a musician who's self-taught, and I'm assuming that even in the engineering part, you are self-taught.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
So music is there in the house. Your folks are listening to different kinds of music. That is kind of setting you up for the musicality which comes later.
Right.
What sets you up for the engineering part, apart from just listening? See, at the end of the day, it's a creative job. I totally agree, but it's still technical knowledge is required. What is an equalizer? What is an amplifier? What is a compressor? What is a mic pre? So that you can use those tools better. So how did that come into the picture?
So I would say as a child also I was very intrigued by all those knobs and buttons of old stereo systems. I would, I would just open up a stereo system and see what's going on. How's that
Oh,
tape
okay.
ping? And I think I almost managed to ruin our Sonodyne system, which I, fondly remember. And storing that, opening up the magnet.
Anindo of Sonodyne is not going to be very happy about that.
But I mean, best sounding, childhood with on those speakers. So I mean, yeah, if they're watching, I'd love those systems. But yeah, when I started making little, demos of my bands and started working on just basic scratches, I took to sequencing music and arranging music. And through that arrangement, I found myself listening to the detailed sound of, simple sample drum sounds, piano sounds, strings, bass, and everything. And putting that and making cover versions for myself, not for anybody, but just educating myself and trying to copy a little bit of the production which was in the bands. I kind of realized it was almost working like ear training. So instead of chords, I was trying to mimic, Acha, this is the kind of reverb or hall sound that I'm hearing. Sounds bright or this sounds mellow. How am I going to recreate with whatever little basic equipment? And I think software wise, I had Cakewalk 6 or 5 when I started off. And the VST, which was the first version of Cubase, which I started working on. And through those little demos with working with friends, helping them out, and mostly we would learn by calling each other up and troubleshoot each other. And it became like my house or my place became the hub of like a call center. I was like constantly saying
call center hub. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it was very I felt I didn't take it up as a challenge, but more like in terms of it was something that was calling to me. And the more I was spending time with it, like hours and hours, I was just trying to educate myself. We didn't even have YouTube back then, so there was no like resource to just quickly Google a thing. But I guess paying attention to and focused listening without any pressures of going on social media and all that kind of helped. And from then on, it became more about refining that process. And as the demos started becoming, better in quality, then other bands started taking notice and saying, started creating some nice demos. Who's doing that? And then they started connecting with me. So I started working demos with other, artists as solo songwriters, maybe then as duos, and then to a band kind of setup.
So the plug and play studio was a conscious decision to kind of have a studio since you were working with so many bands and demos and stuff, or that came through some other route into existence?
Well, I mean, my room sort of became a workspace, but which was still untreated. So my first thing was, I think by the time I was in third year or something, I'd kind of saved up through whatever gig money that we would earn or whatever competition we would earn. I was consciously trying to make sure that I was building some resources to do soundproofing, because that is something I guess you time and again hear that, if you don't have a
Yeah.
good sound, there's no point investing in monitors, speakers, or
Sure.
anything, because it's as good as your reference. And I was fortunate that one of our engineer friends then, Akshay Pandit, who used to help Advaita back in 2004-5, he kind of suggested a carpenter and another local guy and
Mhm.
said that let's try and do up a little bit of acoustic work. And I said, no,
Okay.
let's do it properly. I don't mind putting in an extra 15, 20,000, but I want something which I can, really work with. So he designed a space, and then immediately hearing the same basic equipment that I had in a treated space felt like brand new equipment.
Yeah.
And then from there it became like a conscious choice that, okay, instead of just doing demos, why don't I just take this on and actually help other bands, maybe ease up their process, reduce the learning curve of some of the acts. The time that we took can be reduced, and that was actually working, and a lot of friends had a lot of faith in. And I would say definitely thanks to them that initially those demos started becoming final songs that they could actually release.
So when you were working on those demos, what happens? Like you are actually wearing two hats. You're wearing a music producer hat and you're wearing an engineer hat.
Mhm.
So how do you kind of did you end up kind of so-called producing a lot of those demos as well, or were you just engineering? How did that happen?
Uh, well, I mean, from the beginning, I felt that it was very important to get to know the band members individually also, and probably
Hmm.
even hang their jam or watch a couple of their performances to really know what's going on. Because sometimes that translation gets lost in a very rough demo, for instance, or if the
Right.
band is inexperienced, and especially as an engineer, also when you're starting off, you really want to understand what's going on and not just take on that and not be able to do justice to that
Hmm.
faith that's been given.
Sure.
So I think I was spending a lot of time even listening to them, just trying to educate myself in terms of their tonal, references from the bands that they are listening to. You're going to have to go through stages, first improve on your songwriting and demo versions, and then slowly do justice to what you have with your song and your voice and your instrument. And it kind of felt like a good two-way process, because they were also understanding that, and I was also learning in the process.
Hmm.
And so the demos started becoming more like finished products. But I mean, I was not really lending so much of my own influences to them, but trying to kind of bring out what their own influences were and highlighting it. And yes, if
Sure.
a band needed direction, I would always have a conversation and ask them straight up what is it that they're looking for, and then I would try my best to do justice to that stuff.
So is that how you and Pavitra met? Another demo thing which turned into a meeting where you think, or was it that she was trying to
It
chase you, producer sir, मेरे को demo चाहिए, and you're saying मेरे पास time नहीं है. So how did that happen?
well, well, I mean, I would say it's very close to what you're just saying, but I mean, in 2012, yeah, I was doing music for a musical in Delhi,
Hmm.
and Jayan from Advaita and we were both writing the music for that, and we were
Okay.
auditioning vocalists, of course, for that musical. And then Pavitra happened to be the first person to audition in that, for that
Okay.
musical. But
She get the part?
well, I mean, for that project, because her influences were very strong Hindustani, coming from an Indian classical background. But that particular
Okay.
project required only people from the jazz, soul, R&B sort of space.
Oh, okay.
Fortunately, couldn't have her, take part in that project. But we stayed in touch, and immediately when we heard her, we felt like, okay, here's a voice that is actually trained, and we shouldn't be auditioning, singers like these. It feels very awkward. But we stayed in touch, and I think she asked me to help her out, record and put her thing together, because she had heard about me.
Mhm.
But I told her that I would only record your voice if you promise to do an original and not do a cover, because I want to hear what you're doing with this Riaz, and she had never written a tune. So she worked,
Oh.
and then she sent me a few lines and said, okay, I would like to do a demo with this. And I really liked that demo a lot. It was just a vocal thing on a tanpura. And I said, can I just put some chords down to it and see where this heads? And that ended up becoming Shadow and Light, the first song that we wrote. And it became
Mhm.
a project which was like, okay, let's take a month and just write a song. So over a period of a year, we ended up writing a song every month. And then we decided, okay, you know what, let's give this unit a setup, a name. So we kind of worked backwards. We had all the songs and everything ready, and then decided, acha, let's try and perform this. So yeah, that's how it started.
Okay, that's how that happened. Okay, cool. So we'll just take a little step back to
Yes.
Advaita now. So now Advaita takes shape, takes birth, and you ended up doing your first album for EMI. I believe that's what
Yes.
you had done your first album with. So where did you record that?
So Advaita, again, like I said, we met Shantanu sir, during the artist
That's the
rally.
Empire connection going on.
Yeah, that was the Empire Connection. And that time he had said, I've got a new studio coming up in a couple of years.
Okay.
You should go back to Bombay sometime whenever you do. Check out YRF Studios. So, and we were initially just looking at those buildings right from the outside, construction chal raha tha, and we were like, my God, this is like 10 type of that. Someday, hopefully, it. So with Advaita, what happened is, like I said, we made a lot of demo versions, and then Abhishek, the guitar player from Advaita, we both decided to go to Bombay and just meet Shantanu sir and just play him a few demos. So we walked into Yash Raj Studios and it was like, whoa, ये तो cockpit के अंदर आ गए, rocket cockpit है. It's so huge, just massive desks, this and that. But again, it was really nice of him to spare some time and listen to the demo versions, which he also really liked. And at time itself, he said that I'm so glad that you're a band that has a good direction and you're working on your, not just a scratch, it's actually assembled well. So then we decided that let's try and make our dreams come true. We'll somehow raise funds, but do this process, and that was a very big learning experience for the whole band to come together and track separately yet isolated and as the band.
Yeah, the first time doing that, I mean, first time for any artist or a band to
But,
actually go to a studio is a huge, huge learning curve, no doubt about it.
So, I mean, you learn so many things, of course, as you grow, you realize there's so many things you can do differently always. It's a constantly evolving process. But I guess everybody needs to have that one chance of being able to work, in a base like that.
So how many songs were there in Grounded for Space, first album?
We had 10 songs, 10 originals that we'd written.
And those 10, you had actually done the groundwork, putting it together, structure and all before you hit Yash Raj, right?
We were probably 85% there in terms of all the structures were down, all the parts everybody had to do, all the vocal lines, the lyrics, everything was done. And one song is what we had just about written a couple of months before hitting the studio. Rest, everything was stuff that we'd also performed live. So we had a nice cohesive vibe going in terms of how it would sound live together and tracking it. So I would say about 65-70% of the album was recorded at Yash Raj, and then we also tracked a lot of parts at my studio by then, which was already operational. So we did a lot of parts, and in fact, a couple of those songs or 3 songs, the original vocal takes that I had recorded were the ones which actually were used in the final album. Because sometimes what happens is like that first take as a vocalist is so and special, and then when you go to a different space, maybe you get intimidated, or it's just a different space. Sometimes it doesn't come through.
So here is something for everybody who's listening in that, especially as vocalists, particularly as vocalists, you might have sung in your house or in your home studio, whatever, or maybe a studio that you're very familiar with for a very long period of time. And suddenly when you change space, you go to another city, another studio or something else, it actually throws off a lot of singers. It really throws them off in terms of their entire focus, and it takes them time to settle down. So why do we call these singers professional playback singers or other professional singers? Because they have gone over this hump. They can adapt and they can quickly deliver any new space very quickly, and that takes a lot of time. It doesn't happen overnight. So I think I'm just capturing on what Anindo was saying. It just reminded me that most singers come with this idea, that I'm very good at where I'm singing, and I will just go to Bombay, Chennai, wherever, and I'll start singing immediately. But they're in for a disappointment sometime because it does not happen that quickly. So what you're saying is absolutely right. You got displaced because you're in a new place, and your earlier takes, because you were in a comfort zone and everything, was so good that they warranted being in the final take. Yeah, that happens a lot of times. Sure.
Even the recording process for instrumentalists, I would say, like when you're in the same room, literally sitting next to each other and tracking each other, and there's a slightly casual way of also in informal way in the room because you're friends and you're working together. But suddenly when you have somebody else record you, and especially of a very, very high repute, and you're paying something like $4,000 an hour to record it, So you have to be so
Pressure.
and there's so much pressure, especially on independent bands. I mean, I'm sure when it's a commercial film project,
Yeah.
then the whole year is probably booked out for the studio, but that pressure is not on to the final session musician. So that's again something I think independent musicians really, they have to really prepare yourself, and those demos are crucial, I think.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think I reiterate that again for bands who want to first time get into a recording studio, any studio. I mean, Yashraj, of course, definitely if you can. And a huge shout out to particularly Shantanu, who
Yes.
encourages the independent bands and gives them as much as support that he can. And one has to acknowledge that what he does. Having said that, as a band, as an artist, you have to
Mm,
make sure that your homework, your prep work, your pre-production, what are you going to do in a studio? How are you going to go about organizing? What are you going to dub first? What are you going to dub second?
mm,
Is very, very, very critical because you're paying by the hour and you're a new band. You don't have that kind of money or the financial bandwidth to, even think about spending half an hour having coffee. You want to do something while somebody else has coffee. So it's very important that you focus, you structure, you walk in with everything prepared,
yes.
then it makes sense to go into a studio and do it, which is what I think you guys did. Because I remember Shantanu talking about your band, and we met, and he said, "I just recorded this band at Advaita, and it was great fun doing it."
Mhm.
And maybe he did play me a track, and it was quite impressive. So I remember, and he talked about you guys. So it must have made an impact on him that
Yes.
how well prepared or whatever you guys did was so good on that. So yeah, very important, guys, for especially for indie bands.
Mm.
It's very important to do that. Just be prepared. Just walk in prepared as much as you can.
Have a conversation with the engineer or whoever's producing you, and just have a heart to heart and understand each other, because it's too late by the time you're in the recording process, and then
Yeah.
feel that things not in the right space, because it's all emotion and energy which you're capturing more than the parts, and if that's not right, you feel very, very like out of
So the second also album also happened there. The one you
so
did with EMI again.
first one was primarily recorded there with some parts at my place, and I mixed the
Okay.
first, and then we sent it for mastering to UK Metropolis Studios. The second one, I think we again did a similar process. We recorded some of the stuff already here, and we did a lot of groundwork. I think most of my keys were already done at the studio, and then we went there. Then we took those backing tracks, and we started re-recording whatever we needed to fill up, and then we mixed the second album there itself at Yashraj, and then it was sent to I think Chris
Chris
for
Athens.
master. Chris Evans,
Yeah.
yes.
Andrew also. So was there any point of time while you're doing these two recordings that, see, one was that your vocals were good and you used it, but any flip thing happened that you actually heard something in the big studio and you realized, oh my God, we have to do this again. It's not sounding right. Anything like that happen? Any instrument or anything? Any track?
Well, I think it works both ways. Sometimes you want something to sound larger, and it just sounds extremely large in a big studio with pristine preamps. The whole routing is so good from the beginning that everything ends up becoming really nice and large. But also, I would definitely say that sometimes you want certain things to actually sound intimate and smaller, which
Okay.
a large room with a lot of distant miking sounds extremely big and airy, but somewhere in the demo version, because you've lost that intimacy, you feel is that song now taking a different direction. So those are
Hmm.
things you start learning. It's all about ear training, and it's not really right or wrong, but it's something as experience would teach you then to understand that you've got to also try and have some vision of that production in your head when you're trying
Yeah, yeah.
to write the part, whether you want this to actually sound large while recording or make it sound large through production later. So I
So,
things like drums, for instance, a lot of
mhm.
bands
Yeah,
that large room sound, but they have a very basic drum kit in a small dead room. So that can't, beyond a point, it can't be changed. Or you want a 70s style drum kit, but recorded in a huge room. Again, it would sound different. So it's important to kind of know what individually as bandmates you want, as a collective
Mhm.
what you want. And then, if you do have the budgets to permit, then by all means experiment as much in a big space and then choose what you want.
Okay. So how was it getting an email from Karsh Kale saying, hey guys, you want to jump on board?
Well, I mean, we had been emailing him, I think, for 4 or 5 years, just sending out links, not that, please listen to us or something like that. I think Pavitra was sending him each of our tracks as we were doing it, because she also really likes
Right.
sending out music to people she liked the music of. And I had also sent. So one day, I mean, suddenly I saw a message pop up from him saying, "Hey, heard your tunes from Sharon Light, really liked it. Let's talk when I'm in Bombay." And I was like, "Whoa, this doesn't happen every day." Messaging me. So then he spoke to us, and then he said, "I've really liked this work. It's very inspiring, and we have some stuff coming up. Would you like to collaborate?" And for us,
Wow.
very very a touching gesture, because a lot of senior musicians, or they would say that they really like the stuff, but when the right opportunity comes, and most often than not, even if the opportunity is there, something holds them back from really showcasing somebody new.
Hmm.
But here was someone who just said, this is happening, come down to the studio, let's figure this out. And within a month we had all the logistics worked out, and we went,
Great.
we recorded some material with him. And of course, I've known Warren for a long time,
Hmm.
and meeting him was amazing. And to work with him on our song, he added some fabulous parts. And Jairo, again, insane drummer. All of you know how good he is. So the best of that whole core rhythm section,
Yeah.
meeting was a wonderful experience.
Great. So now tell me, Anindo, you did your earlier stint of working for people before you. I mean, you were just you had your own band, but you were still making demos for people, and artists were coming to you because
Right.
you had the wherewithal. You had a studio, and you could maybe add parts, and so they would come to you. But
Mm-hmm.
today, if you have to find a new artist, how do you go about finding a new artist, like a new voice, a new musician? Today, how do you do that?
It's interesting. Now there's so much content. So usually, what happens is, like, when you're seeing that real, genuine, fresh idea come through, it just shows, even if it's done on a phone and recorded and put up.
Hmm.
More so than even a properly produced demo. But when you don't hear that honesty in that demo, you know that this is contrived, or this is being copied from somewhere else. It's not that person's voice, instrumentally or vocally. So I really like listening to feeds that people have, and then some artists that I like, I make note of that this person I should probably approach and see what's happening in their life if they need some kind of guidance. And at other times, what happens is, of course, if I produce the band, and
Hmm.
music reaches out other bands and artists, and when they connect, they write back to me. So at
Okay.
that point, then I usually tell them to just send me a demo, and then I kind of hear them, and I try and understand if the band is actually ready to record. More
Yeah,
often
or
than
do
not,
they need some more
tell
time?
them, yeah, I more often than not, I tell them, take 2 months more, prepare it well, because audio is like a photograph. After that, you don't want to change it later. It's time stamp that's gone. So you might well spend extra time, do it properly. So
Great.
yeah, so that
That's
works. And I'm not afraid of kind of not losing work, but I'm not afraid of losing that opportunity to work with them earlier. I would rather spend extra time, and time is money.
time is
Everything else
money.
comes later. So,
Great. So somebody asked a question. So
yes.
how did you develop Anindo Bose sonic footprint? Like, I mean, your sonic print. He of course mentioned that he liked the airiness and the openness in your mixes, and a very tight, nice bottom end and good stereo spread. So he felt that that is Anindo Bose sonic imprint on a mix. So how did you come to develop that? Like, did you actively work at it and, yeah, I want to develop this, or did it slowly happen over a period of time, or accidentally you hit upon something? How did that come about?
Uh, I mean, it's all about ear training, I feel, and it's still growing. With engineers, every day your ears are just listening to new frequencies, new sounds. You're discovering new things. You put on an old album, you suddenly hear things. Even 20 years later, it'll be like, oh, ye to nahi suna tha pehle. The same thing happens with uh, your own productions. If you listen to your older mixes, you will feel that,
Yeah,
oh, this could have been different. But I guess you're all putting out the best version of yourselves at that moment in time, and not putting so much pressure on yourself to give that absolute perfect mix, which will be the same 25 years later. Also, it'll be like, it couldn't have been different. So it's hard to say that you land on a certain sonic footprint and say that is set in stone. But there is a tendency of liking certain treatments, I would say. and you adhere to that, and more often than not go towards that kind of place. So I feel comfortable with a certain kind of sound palette that I choose for the band
Mhm.
that I work with.
That you
And
work with.
more often I prefer taking on bands that I would do justice to their sound with, rather than just saying sabke saath kaam karna hai and not be the right person for them. I'd rather have them produce the music that they have with an engineer who would completely complement that style. But at the same time, I'm completely open to experimenting with something which I've never tried out, so that it feels fresh, because you shouldn't also be stuck in your rut and feel that usi comfort zone mein aap kar rahe hain.
Oh yeah, there is constantly you're challenging yourself every
Yeah.
day as well, apart from, all the other stuff that you're doing. So have you had any perfect mixes? How many perfect mixes you would have done?
No, I never like to call them perfect. I would just say these are abandoned at a certain point, like most engineers say. And then you're like, you've reached a point where you're kind of working in the negative than improving anything. So, and
Mhm.
it's important to also go with your gut instinct after having spent some years in the field.
Sure.
And then uske baad, I guess it's just about hearing it onto any different stereo system, headphones, and just feeling the vibe. If it's in the right place, if it's not throwing you off, then I think I just go with it rather than pinpointing too much that this frequency at this hertz somewhere 2 dB ज़्यादा है कम है. I look at more as, is the song communicating for that artist who recorded, or is it working for me as the engineer? And if it is something that works as a visiting card strong enough for somebody else to give you more work. Uh,
So,
and
so
just
do you feel that the music part that you learned on your own
Mhm,
and the experiences that you had with the various bands you played in, then Advaita, then the musical you were doing, and then with Shadow and Light,
mhm.
do you think all that music experience has kind of enhanced your engineering side, or or how do you feel about that?
Absolutely, you've hit the nail on the head, because when as a musician or as an instrumentalist, or knowing a few instruments or how they work, being able to arrange music, I think that's the key in trying to bring out like just a mix engineer as opposed to somebody who's a producer engineer, because
Mm-hmm.
that quality kind of really really helps you take decisions a lot quicker than experimenting and then getting to a certain sound. So, and
Mm-hmm.
especially when you know your instruments inside out, or different instruments, then it's much easier to communicate with individual band members and really talk to them about the parts and the arrangements, and fix all of that before you even try and record that. Because once all that's ironed out, I guess everybody says, because the mixes,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
arrangement fixes the song, rather than going too much in how to clean this up and.
Have you had an experience where somebody's walked in with a demo and they're gung-ho about it, this is it, and you feel musically it's wrong. I mean, it's not okay. What they are singing or what they're writing is just not working musically for that person. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you go about putting that message across to a fresh, new, bright-eyed, enthusiastic artist who walks into your studio? How do you put that across?
It is very tricky. It's a very thin line between offending someone and also inspiring someone to actually step back, detach themselves from the art, and look at it objectively. So I think I try and be as humble as possible about it and explain why it is that my point of view would be different. If at all I feel so strongly about someone, it
Hmm.
definitely happens in terms of lyrical word spacings. Sometimes that is not at par with where the song arrangement itself is. Sometimes you feel that that's the element which has not been paid attention to,
All
or
right.
little things like the endings of a word being left too short, or it's too draggy and long. We're just figuring things like that, and most importantly, figuring out the rests in the arrangement and telling them to back off and let that song breathe a little bit more. So
Mhm.
that's usually those are the spaces where I try and tell them, like, getting the drummer and bass player to really know each other's parts before they even come to me, so that they can sing those parts in their head and tell me individually that, yeah, I know exactly where the fill, even the last hi hat, where it's opened or closed. Or let's say the guitar player and the keyboard player knowing their voicing so well that they choose
Mm.
the right sounds. So it's just about making them communicate a little better with each other, and then in the process trying to refine things.
Great. There's a gentleman, I don't know, gentleman already, but very interesting. Winnie the Pooh is their handle. So it got my attention, definitely. And so that person is asking, in music production, what do you learn first? Do you learn MIDI part of it? Do you learn the notation part of it? Or do you learn just the overall thing altogether? So what do you learn first in the sequence thing? Anything? You have a format or a formula for that?
Well, like I said in the beginning, I'm a completely self-taught musician. I can't read and write music at all. But yes, I do know what is right and wrong. You have to work on your ears. Music is all about ear training, and sound engineering is literally an extension of that ear training. Somebody knows how to harmonize a chord. Sound engineers know how to harmonize the frequencies together to make sure everything is clean. So I think it's best to keep it basic and just, let's say, concentrate on chordal movements or understanding ear training, how to put chords together, how to do arrangements, make little demo versions, maybe 2-minute versions of doing covers of existing songs, just to understand how a band sound works. As a keyboard player, it's the easiest to interface with softwares, but even guitar players do that. And it's nice if, vocalists can also learn a certain instrument and write down parts and know how songs work. Once all that is done, then you try and see how you change sounds and how you put it together, which is where production happens. So I think first
Production,
is
yeah.
important. If you want to be a musician producer, then that's the first step. I would say, definitely working on your training with that approach. But if you just want to primarily do mix production, again, I would say, like, hearing better in a better sounding room with good monitors is the first step you can do to invest for your ears. Because if you have a
Right.
bad sounding speaker, it's very hard to, like, tell your ears how do you grow then.
Yeah, even as a musician or a programmer or
Mm,
if you are not hearing the frequencies that you are actually performing or programming,
mm,
how do you know what you are doing?
that-
That's the essence of the whole thing. So you need to have a good, decent monitoring environment. I mean, it could be on headphones. Nowadays, the quality of headphones are very
it-
good as
it-
well. I mean, you can hear really low frequencies on headphones as well. So there's nothing to stop you from arming yourself with good quality monitoring so that even when you're programming, because I sometimes get tracks where obviously they're not hearing the low end. So there is this huge gunk which is happening at the bottom, but they've not heard it.
yes.
And my job or my poor assistant's job most of the time is cleaning those tracks of
One day,
all that gunk. Right. So before I can get on to doing the mix. So Badri here, a friend of mine is here. He's asking how deep you go into understanding the music part before you start doing a project. He is, of course, coming from an Indian classical background. So he's asking you from that point of view.
I think it's important, even if you're not a vocalist, let's say, but
Mhm.
it's important to understand what the vocalist is doing, because that emotion helps you then mix the song better. You're not
Yeah.
necessarily going to just say ये vocal line इस part में soft है तो soft क्यों है, loud कर दो, but maybe the emotion behind that vocal line was, which is why it
Sure.
was sung soft. So things
Mhm.
like that,
Absolutely.
context of your songs. It's also, if especially when you're working with Indian classical with those microtones, it's very important to understand how those murkis work, because you don't want to unnecessarily straighten up those vibratos or the so many times it happens. And there is a traditional way production where, unfortunately, a lot of commercial mixes straighten them out so much that you hear those vocalists, you're like, wow, सारा अंदाज निकल गया, एक line में straight हो गया वो. So
True.
I guess it's important to know the producer's point of view before you delve
Mhm.
into that, and then go into that. And it's important to keep that balance between whether the vocalist has lost that emotion which he or she might have initially put in, versus what the
Right.
production treatment wants and what you as an engineer want. So it's a balancing game also, but
Mm.
it's very important. You should know the music to whatever extent you can, and it shouldn't just be that हाँ sound आ रहा है उसको ऊपर नीचे कर रहे हैं आप. It has to be emotionally done.
Right. So I hope all the aspiring music producers, engineers are listening to what Anindo is telling you. Come what may, you need to give a serious thought and serious time to listening to that music which you are going to be producing further or mixing or recording. It's very important, and the emotional connect that should not get lost or in translation anywhere down the line. So that's very critical in all kinds of music. It doesn't matter what kind of music. The emotional connect is what we are looking for. So Anindo, you have been also a very big Instagram person, and you have been promoting yourself as an individual and an artist, as well as an engineer producer. So for again, people who want to be on Instagram at the same time do their creative work, how do you increase your fan base? Like how do you go about doing that?
I think I'm still learning to do that. I'm very actually most of the time I'm posting puns and taking gear shots and posting that. It is difficult to do that, but it is important. I mean, now especially social media following and getting the numbers, everybody concentrates on that. But I think it's very important as an artist to really put a quality benchmark on whatever you're posting. It needs to
Mhm.
be something that is really saying something important, because you are somewhere down the line inspiring somebody to do something with that, maybe better it. So you have to always try upping the bar. It can't be just randomly kuch bhi dal diya. And unfortunately, in trying to create that content or that constant flow, a lot of times people don't refine what they're doing. It
Mhm.
takes very little investment to get a good microphone for your phone also, and not just record it on the phone and put things like that out. But it's a conscious choice whether you want to put that out, and you would obviously see the difference. Why is it that certain artists just have more numbers? It's also because they're spending so much back end time in that production.
All right.
Sure, some of them have management and production companies backing it, but if you look at even little demos that people put out, some of them really happen properly because they've done that riyaz behind it. They've maybe chosen a good corner of their room so it doesn't sound too roomy. As basic as that. But just getting some more like insight into why needs to be better
They
quality.
put thought behind it. You see, whatever you do, you put some thought and some reasoning behind it that why you're doing it.
Yeah,
I will just add to what you just said. My view of that is that every musician, every artist, whoever they might be, they just need to remember that whatever you put out, firstly, once it's out there, you cannot backtrack it. You can't say sorry, undo.
yeah,
You can't. It's out there.
yes,
So you better be careful. You better take into cognizance what are you putting out, because once it's gone, it's going to be judged.
mm-hmm.
You can't say I'm sorry. I remember somebody saying in an interview that you very rarely find asterisks at the bottom of a song or a CD saying, I'm sorry, I was not well, so I don't sound okay on track number 4. That doesn't happen, right?
Yeah,
There's a reason why it doesn't happen. So that's why it's very, very important we be clear what are we putting out, because that is going to be your legacy,
yeah,
what you put out. People are going to remember you and judge you with that.
right.
So every time we put out something as an artist, even like I said, I consider mix engineers as artists as well, even engineers. When you put
Yes.
out the mix, mastering engineers, when you put out the master,
Mm,
everybody has to be cognizant of the fact that you are going to be putting out something which people are going to listen to even when you are not here.
yes. Yeah.
So it's your legacy. And please, please, please put the entire thought, weight, thinking behind it when you do that. If you're not happy, don't do it.
Mm, mm,
Just make sure you are the happiest person releasing it out there. You're not feeling apologetic about it, like,
yeah.
I'm sorry I did this. You have to be 100% on with it. So yeah, I totally agree with you on that, Anindo. So what's the future now? I mean, are you getting seriously into doing more production work, or this shadow and light going to occupy your time, or live shows are going to occupy your time? I mean, of course, we are in a state of
Yes.
lockdown, and I don't know how long this is going to continue. So, where is your crystal ball on this, Anindo, right now for yourself?
I mean, I have always kind of rotated between being a studio producer, performer, and a live sound engineer, live performer. So it's usually between the two, and I like doing the both of them because I don't like
Mhm.
only being caught in a live performance space or only producing, and I need to feel that. Of course, like I said right now, and it's very hard on a lot of people. I do feel privileged and blessed that I have a space that I'm still, being able to use, and some work keeps happening. And a lot of us, have equipment at home that we can actually use. Keep
Mhm.
So I completely acknowledge that, and I really hope it lifts so everybody can get back to the they've been doing. Uh, but I think using this time generally to just write some new songs, explore older ideas, and just looking at that, because songwriting is so different when you have extra time on hand. because then you're looking at so many other aspects of it. Sometimes you try to overthink also, but yeah, so that's happening. Working on mixes, also trying to listen to demos of certain other bands that want to record. So I keep telling bands to start doing the demos now instead of waiting for 3 months for the lockdown to finish. At least finish their song, even if it's a basic scratch, send it out, let it be a tangible format so they can listen to it themselves, and then 2 months later maybe look at it, and at least they have done some work. So that is something. With Advaita, we just put out one song just a week ago, which we did as part of the Unison concert series about a couple of years ago. That song, in fact, was written in 2006 and was almost going to be part of the Grounded in Space album, but then we couldn't finish it then, and now 14 years later we released. So sometimes songs that long, and sometimes a song could happen in 4 hours. But yeah, it should never be put out, like I said, before you really
So,
feel it.
so Anindo, I'm curious. When you opened a session of 14 years ago, what was your reaction when you heard it?
But first thing is I couldn't hear it because all the VST plugins didn't work.
Didn't work on this one.
Yeah, I mean it was just names and errors. So the first thing was to try and remove all those plugins and then try to understand which plugin was meant for a kit or a piano sound or something like that. Fortunately, I had good practice even then of naming my tracks. It was not
Good.
just 01 and 02. So I reloaded all those sounds, and then I had one audio bounce of that and
So you use that as a reference.
use that reference, and then and fortunately we were able to work on that, and that happened.
I learned that lesson also very hard way as well when I opened some sessions for very long ago, and it was very important that we get that same sound back. And again, people have updated softwares, plugins, and everything, and it was very difficult to kind of get that session back. So you end up stripping it of everything and starting from scratch almost. So it's not that you think I'll open this session 10 years later and I'll take up from there itself. It doesn't happen. So I started actually, once I'm happy with the mix or the client is happy with the mix, I actually started printing all that stuff that I was using as plugins, and I'm printing that track almost like stem. So actually
Right.
making stems of those tracks and printing them just below it. And nowadays with offline bounce, it's easy to kind of, it doesn't take real time bounce anymore, which it used to at one point. So
Right.
now you can actually bounce tracks and just keep them under it. So in case when you do open later and though you actually have the audio processed
Correct. From.
that and sitting there,
Yes.
or freeze tracks or commit tracks or whatever you
Yes.
might want to call them in each software. I found that to be helpful, and I'm just sharing this not just with you, but mostly for other
It's
people
great.
who are listening, that
Yes.
this might be the route to take. One of the things to make sure that you have a little more backward compatibility with what you were doing 8 years, 10 years back, and suddenly you want to do a remix version of your own song and you can't, just because all the VST, nothing is opening up. So yeah, this is one way to kind of get around it. And so how do you listen to any people's work that you really like as a reference in terms of just mixing as well as musically? Do you keep listening? Do you get time to kind of do that, listen to other people's work and say, wow, I like this, or I like this music or something? Do you do that?
It happens, but I mean, I wouldn't say it's too long a period, because most often than not, you're working on somebody's tracks, existing tracks. So that itself kind of works as music. And beyond that, if I want any free time off, I actually sometimes, if, while we were driving and all, I would roll down the windows and just hear the traffic noise, because I feel that was very relaxing. And you don't want any sound or anything in your head, and just clear your space. But yeah, I mean, production sounds, sometimes it's nice to just listen to instrumentals, because then also it's just kind of clears your brain and you're not looking towards hearing the lyrics or the thing, but
Sure.
just all either production thing, maybe some orchestral sounds, string sounds, that kind of things. Of course, I love listening to bands like Snarky Puppy. That is just
Oh, yeah,
live and in the studio, and that's where you really,
absolutely.
the amount of research the engineers would have gone through to be able to bring their vision into a small stereo track that everybody's enjoying, and
Yeah.
but then realizes there's so much other stuff behind. So that, and yeah, just generally listening to some other bands that have released work. Another album that I really liked recently that released was Thermal and a Quarter, Mad Mad World.
The
Really,
new
really
one, yes. Oh,
album.
they've been doing amazing work. Bruce and gang have been putting out
Yeah,
some amazing work right from the word go.
absolutely
Uh,
amazing. So
Absolutely good work. So good. Anindo, we are at 7:56. At some point, the clock will start kicking down and into a reverse spiral. Uh, and I want to thank you for taking the time out and sharing so much with us and all the people who are there online with us so
Thank
that
you.
they also get an insight into it.
I'm so grateful to you. I'm really honored to be part of your series, and it's amazing. We all aspire to be engineers who've had a illustrious career, and with somebody like you right there sitting interviewing me, it's amazing this experience. And in fact, I had a question. Like you started out so many years ago. I think you started out before I was even born.
I'm a dinosaur, yeah, so let's not get into how long ago I started.
But if you say just the production shift, of course, so many things have changed. But what are the things what you really miss about earlier recording days? And do you feel that committing to your parts and just putting it on tape rather than having options was a better way to go? Or now with digital, it's just this is how it should have been even back then.
Okay, so my take on this is that I am old school, which means that I like for musicians to perform together. I
Mm.
would like them to be in the same space, even if it means locking them in till you finish the album. I'm not going to open the door. So be it.
Yeah.
Because when musicians interact, magic happens, man. I mean, there's no denying that. I mean, you look at that's why the album of the 50s, 60s, 70s, all the albums till the point we had dubbing coming in, which allowed you to actually record everybody remotely
Mm.
why are they so musically beautiful and so engaging? Why? Because it's actually musicians playing against each other. It's like atoms against atoms. And something else is coming out of it, which you are not prepared for sometimes. It's just going to come at you. And then you have to make the best of it at that point of time. And that's what I think music is all about. So
Absolutely.
yes, that's for me is important. I wish we had the editing capabilities which we have with digital with
Right.
the combination of being able to perform together. What I mean, it's the ideal thing. So when we were recording Kandisa, for example, with Indian Ocean, my thrust was that this band thrives on being on stage live, and their energies come from feeding off each other.
Right.
We can't have them dubbing. So
Of
we
course.
set them up in Western Outdoor as a live performance. We took 2 days to just set up with
Mm.
headphone mixes and everything. And
Right.
so Kandisa has been recording essentially like a live band.
Completely live. Yeah.
So people
And
still tell me the energy is great, but that's
hearing
because they are
and
playing like that. I didn't do anything. I didn't add any energy masala to it. The band is doing it. We just set it up like that. So I believe in that musicians need to be together to do that. And that's very important for me. Dubbing has its advantages, but I think playing together as musicians, that's why live is so beautiful. I mean, you know that.
of course, yes.
When you're playing live, the eye contact and then just kicking in something, trying something new and trying to outguess the other one. My God, that brings so much dynamics and energy, man. So once again, Anindo, thank you very much, and all the best to you, your band Advaita, Shadow and Light, and your plug and play studio, and to your career as a music producer of India as well as engineer. All the
Thank you.
best to you, man, and I hope we keep bumping into you when you're in Bombay next, or if I'm
I,
in Delhi
yeah,
next when we get to travel.
come and sit and listen to all these stories and watch you work sometime. And thank you so much for making part of these again. Thanks.
Hey, man, most welcome, and Pavitra, hi and bye. I think she was there somewhere. So, thank you, everybody. Be safe, be home. Thank you so much.